Welcome to the Tribe of Testimonies. Here you will find conversations with faithful Native American members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sharing their stories and their love of the Savior. My name's Andrea Hales. I'm Navajo, and I'm glad that you've decided to come and join us today. Today my guest is Donald Rodgers. He'll tell you all about himself. So this intro is really short, but he was so kind. He and his wife came to my house, and I could just tell how much he loves her, and he's so grateful for her. And I love meeting people like that who are just smitten by their spouse, even after all the years. So I hope you enjoy this time with us. Here is Brother Rodgers. I'm here today in my home with Brother Donald Rodgers, and I'm really happy to have him here. Would you please, Brother Rodgers, introduce yourself in your tribal way as much as possible? If it's in your language, great. If it's not, that's fine. Not everybody speaks their language, and some languages are dead.
Yes, ma'am. Bear with me on this. Tanake, Tinielo, Niat Namosika, Niat Donald Rodgers. Hello, how are you? My name is Red Cloud. My name is Donald Rodgers. Some years ago, after I returned home from my mission, I had asked Chief Blue, because I had started teaching the Catawba Indians class at a museum that I worked for a Catawba name. And he came back several weeks later and gave me a nice little letter and said, I would like to name you Namosika, which is Cloud Red. And then he gave me a little story of the Ogallala Sioux Chief Red Cloud. And he promised me in some short manner that I would be chief someday. And I said, okay, that's great. I was just getting ready to get married, and I was like, yeah, that'd be an interesting story. So he gave me that name, and I didn't really think or ponder on that for a long time. And then I read the story of Chief Red Cloud and how he led his people out in the West, and some of the things that he was able to teach them about things that he didn't know he was sharing the gospel with, but he was. Mm-hmm. And then I served as chief of the Catawba Indian Nation from 2007 to 2011, and was able to do a lot of neat things. I grew up extremely poor on the reservation, and as I was elected chief, I did things I never thought I would do. I went to President Obama's first inauguration at the request of a Congressman John Spratt. My wife and I both went and had a wonderful experience there doing that and learning about the politics of D.C. It was really neat.
Cool. Would you share something that you love about your heritage? It can be pretty much anything, a story, a celebration, a way of life, a ceremony, anything that you can think of that but especially as it relates to the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yes, ma'am. The missionaries came to our reservation in the late 1800s, late 1870s. And as they came, they brought with them the stories of the Book of Mormon. And in those stories of the Book of Mormon, many of our people relayed those stories to our traditional stories, and they sounded very similar. And so they became... they were touched by the Spirit, and then were all started to be baptized. At one point in time, about 95% of the tribe belonged to the church. I had read a recent, one of my cousins who was writing a book about the history of the church with the tribe. She sent me a journal entry on April the 5th, I think it was around 1905, 1906. The missionary wrote that some 35 Lamanite Catawbas were baptized in the Catawba River, and my great-grandfather was one of those. And to see his name written there, and to hopefully follow in his footsteps, was a wonderful experience. But I think that me being a traditional storyteller as well, I remember the beginning story of how our tribe began, about a young lady who was led away by a butterfly rather than a snake, and she was lost, and a young man came from the sky to save her. And he told her that he couldn't go back where he came from, but he would have to live with her, and they would grow old and have children, and they would live until their head on their hair grows as white as the breast of a swan, and then they would pass away. So I'm getting there. My hair on my head's almost as white as the breast of a swan. But I think that that's one of the things that I do love, is that the history of our traditional stories equate to the old Adam and Eve story and other stories that we learn about how to be good, how to help one another, and those types of things.
Yeah, bring you back.
Yes, ma'am.
I bet some of them even share the basic 10 Commandments in one way or another.
There's a real neat story I love to tell about the story of the chipmunks. And the gist of the story is, well, let me tell it.
Yeah.
So 2 little brothers, chipmunk brothers, were walking alongside the river, and at this point in time, they didn't have any stripes on their back. They looked like a little short-haired squirrel. And this little brother says, "Hey, big brother, my back, it sure does itch. Will you scratch it for me?" And we know how big brothers are reluctant to help little brothers out. So he reluctantly got his paw out, and out came his claws, and he started to scratch little brother's back. And little brother's standing there, "Oh, that feels good. That feels good right there, right there. Hey, what'd you stop for?" And big brother had stopped, and he says, "Well, my paw's tired. I don't want to scratch your back all day. We know how big brothers are. They don't want to help us too long. They just want to help us for a few minutes." And he says, but the itch is still there. Will you please scratch it really, really hard for me one last time, and I want to ask you to do it again. So he started to, big brothers are conniving, so out came his paws, and out came all of his claws, and he started to rake down little brother's back really, really hard. And little brother said, "Oh, that feels good, that feels, oh, stop, you're hurting me." And big brother jumped back, and he says, "Oh, no, little brother, I left these stripes in your back." And we know how big brothers love to tell us stories or lies. Yeah. And little brother said, I don't believe you. And big brother said, "Well, go look at your reflection in the East Swamp, the river, and you'll see those beautiful stripes." And so little brother hopped down to the bank of the river, and he looked at his reflection in the river, and holy cow, he saw these beautiful stripes. And he says, "Wow, big brother, those sure are beautiful." And big brother's up there on the bank of the river kicking around an old pine cone. "Yeah, they sure are pretty, but I don't have them." And little brother said, "Hey, would you like for me to scratch your back really, really hard and put those beautiful stripes in your back?" And big brother said, "Would you please?" And so little brother scratched big brother's back really, really hard and left those beautiful stripes in his back as well. And this is the true Catawba story of Dippendatuk, one whose back is striped, or the story of the chipmunk. And with that, the moral to the story is something we heard from our grandparents a long time ago. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. I'll help you if you help me. And so I tell this story all the time. My grandkids love it. They love to hear me tell the story of the chipmunks. They say, "Papa, tell me the story of the chipmunks," because it helps them to understand that as we grow older and as we go through life, we need to help one another. Yeah. I love the story of, we always have, "Hey, brother so-and-so is moving at church on Saturday morning. How many brethren can come?" And everybody raises their hand. We'll go, and then they'll go. And then somebody that's helping him move is going to move at some point in time, and they're going to say, "Hey, brother so-and-so needs some help." And hopefully that brother who got help from everybody else will show up too and help them move. So that's a real traditional story that's fun to tell and get people to understand, hey, we just have to help one another out throughout this life.
Yeah. Great. That's awesome. So were you raised as an active member of the church?
Yes, ma'am, I was. I was baptized at 8. A dear cousin of my mom's, he wasn't in the bishopric, but his name was Bobby Blue. He baptized me. We didn't.
So just for a second, for those of you who are listening, there are actually 2 other Catawba interviews prior to this interview today. And one of them is Travis Blue.
And so, Bobby is his uncle.
Okay.
And so Bobby, we had to drive up to Central Charlotte, the old Hilliard Drive building, and that's where the only baptismal font. We didn't have a font in our church. We grew up in a little old white stucco building, kind of a mission look, if I can say that, a mission building, kind of had a more Santa Fe look, or a more Western style stucco building. And we grew up in that church, so we didn't have a baptismal font. And you also talked to John Beck about him baptizing his dad in the Catawba River. Yeah. And a lot of the older folks years ago were baptized in the river. And then there was a policy change with the church, and they said, well, we probably need to, baptize everybody in a font like everybody else was. And so I was baptized there when I was 8. And let me go back in time a little bit. When I was a little child, first born, we lived in the city of Rock Hill, and we attended the Rock Hill Ward. And they leased out a little old building on Main Street in Rock Hill. That's where I grew up in primary and things. And when I was about 4 or 5, my mom got her land assignment on the reservation, so we moved there and started going to the Catawba Ward. The Catawba Ward is a ward by that time. Grew up there, going to primary. Now, my mom and dad wasn't very active. My dad was rarely active. I could probably name, maybe 2 handfuls of times that he actually went to church, right, that I remember. Mm-hmm. My mom went to church sporadically, but they say, some people don't like the saying, but it all depends on what the village is like, mm-hmm. that it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
I had a whole reservation raising me.
Yeah. Because
I had people that would stop at my mom's house and pick me up and take me to primary. Because primary when I was a kid was on Tuesday nights.
Yeah.
And then our primary president, Lynn Warderman, she was my mom's, like a daughter that my mom never had. And so she was the primary president. She would stop and pick me up, make sure I went to primary. And then as I got older, I had a lot of people watch out for me and make sure I went to church. And Travis's brother, Pat, he and I grew up really close, good friends. And I remember just growing up in young men, we had a lot of good friends. And I remember as my dad was sick and I dropped out of high school to help take care of him, Pat and I skipped school and went over to the church farm and cut some firewood. We had an old wood stove that we used, and I'll never forget Pat spending some time doing that. And people just helping people. And people watched out for me a lot and made sure I was there and going to church. And all the way through a lot of different things that happened with church as I got older.
Yeah. That's great. So you said your dad rarely went to church, but you told me that you did serve a mission, and you told me he had part to do with that. Would you like to tell that?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Like I said, my dad didn't go to church a whole lot, and I remember a couple of times as a deacon, he came to church, and I remember the boys, Pat and Don Beck, Johnny's little brother, he and I were good friends as well. They said, look, your dad's here, you need to line up so that you can give him the sacrament. I'll never forget that. It was a special time to be able to do that. But also, as I was in the 11th grade, he had gotten sick. He was diagnosed with bone cancer and wasn't doing really well at all. And that happened over Christmas. I'll never forget that. And so they had him do radiation. They didn't do a whole lot of chemo back then. So they had him do radiation, and they sent him home the 1st of February. And one night, we were sitting in the living room, and he asked everybody to leave, and he wanted to talk to me. So everybody left the living room, and he said, son, I want you to do something for me. And I said, what's that, Daddy? He said, first off, I want you to graduate high school. I know you're skipping out on this semester for some reason. And I said, well, I took the semester off. I had a wonderful high school counselor that really took me in and watched over me and gave me the opportunity to spend some time with my dad. And so her name was Sue Hilton. I'll never forget her. Every time we go back home, we see her because she just means the world to me. She watched out for me, made sure I went to school, and made sure I went back to 12th grade and graduate and everything. But just a special woman. And she told me, she said, you need to go spend time with your dad. And so he found out I was not going to school, and so he says, now, son, you got to graduate high school. And I said, well, Dad, I'm going to do my best. No one in our family had ever graduated high school. Grandparents, mom, dad, either one of them. And I said, I can do that. And just the backstory is, when my dad was 19, he was in a hunting accident, and he shot his left hand off. And so he only had his right hand. And so the second thing he wanted me to do, he says, now, I know how much you love this church. I want you to serve a mission for the church. And I said, well, Dad, do you know how poor we are? Even in the late 80s, it took about $10,000 to serve a mission.
Yeah, and in the late 80s, if you got called to more expensive mission, you
Yes.
paid more.
That's right. And it was about $325 a month to serve in California. I went to Santa Rosa, California, but so I'm sorry, I'm already shooting the story. But my dad, he looked at me and he said, I told him, I said, Dad, we're really poor. It'd take a lot to do this. He looked at me and he raised his one hand up and he raised his nub up and he says, son, I'm sorry, I got to go backwards again. My dad could do anything. He built our house with one hand. He did all the plumbing and electrical work. Now, it was a shotgun shack, if I can say that, as we see on reservations, but it was a house. He could do mechanic work. He could change the engine out in the old car over the weekend by himself with one hand. And so whenever he asked me, I told him, I said, Dad, I don't know if we can do this. He said, well, son, he said, look at this. I've only got one hand, and you see everything I've done with one hand. You got two. You can do twice as much. And then a few weeks later, he passed away. And he wasn't really active in the church. He had some alcoholism problems, and it really took over his life. And so I was a mama's boy. Mm-hmm. My mom, after my dad passed away, I was always a mama's boy, I think, from the time I was born. And it was tough. I was sitting in church one Sunday, and Bishop Kenneth Harris came in, and he says, Donald, I need for you to come. You know, you're 18. We need to start talking about going on a mission and get ready for the next year. So I met him in his office. I said, listen here, Bishop. I said, my dad passed away. I don't have any money. And he says, that's all right. We'll get it taken care of. And I said, well, Native people are prideful. They don't like people to pay for everything for them or take care of them or anything. They like to try to do it on their own. At least that's the way my dad taught me, is to do it on your own. And so a few months later, I get called into Bishop Harris's office again, and here's this big cowboy, and I hope he listens to this. His name's Don Yandel, and big hat, cowboy boots, and the suede pants with the bell bottoms on, big buckle, and I think he had a vest on. Literally a cowboy amongst the Indians.
Yeah.
And he loved to play softball. He and Chief Blue, Gilbert Blue, played softball a lot together. Anyway, he's sitting there and he's rolling his little hands together, and he says, we want to pay for your mission, son. And I was like, I'm sorry. I'd love to take advantage of that, but I need to do it myself. I'd started working and everything, trying to save a few dollars. And then I denied him that. And a couple of weeks later, Bishop Harris calls me in his office again, and he says, hey, I need for you to come back to the office. We need to talk about this mission thing. I said, okay. So I walk in there, and here's Don sitting there again, but beside him was his sweet wife, Gail. And she teared up, and she says, you know what, we have 3 boys. Neither one of them served a mission, and Don and I need blessings. And you're the way for us to get blessings. And I said, how could I deny that? How could I say you don't need to do this for me? And so I thought about it. I went home and told my mom. And she says, well, honey, if you want to serve a mission that bad, let them help you. And so they did. They took care of everything. I mean, everything. Bought all my clothes. Had a little bit of dental work that needed to be done. Took care of all that. And just wonderful people. And as I served, they were blessed. Tremendously blessed. And came home, and a few days later, Don called me, son, I'm glad to have you home. He would only write me about once a month, if that. Gail would write me as much as possible and send me pictures of their vacations and things. And I said,
they were writing to you.
And so he always called me son. It was a little tough on me for having lost my dad. And so he said, well, let's go look around for your car and help you out a little bit. So he took me up to. He had become pretty good with his contract. He owned a contract. He was a contractor, so he did a lot of different things. And so he took me up to Charlotte, and he helped buy me a brand new little car. Basically put the down payment on it and paid some insurance for me. And next thing I know, I'm driving a little 5-speed, which I've never driven a 5-speed before in Charlotte, North Carolina. And but he helped me a great deal. And as we moved and he would contact me on Facebook every now and then. And then I didn't see him for a long time, and I went down to the little Lancaster branch, not too far from the reservation, to ordain my little nephews. And there he was. And he walked up to me and gave me a big hug. He's tender-hearted like me. And he starts to bawl, and I start to bawl, and we're crying. He says, "Son, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm on the high council now." And he goes, "Oh, my gosh, really? Look at you, from a little missionary to a high councilman." And had fond memories with him and his wife, Gail, and they're still doing really good and still around. And every now and then he'll send me a little message on Facebook. "How you doing, son?" I'll never forget that. But if it wasn't for him and Gail, I don't think I would have had the opportunity to serve a mission. I probably would have, but it may have been at the church's expense. And but I am grateful for that opportunity to have served a mission there in Santa Rosa, California. Met some really neat people. Barbara Jones, she was well known to train the Miss California, Miss USA pageant winners. And if you ever have you taken your kids up to the butterfly biosphere up here?
Yeah, the Thanksgiving Point one.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
That is in her mother's honor. She ended up moving to Highland, and I didn't know that. And I was in Big Lots one day, and here she comes in with a big fur hat on, and I'm like, "Sister Jones." She goes, "Hold on a second. Say that again." I said, "Sister Jones." She goes, "Oh my gosh, it's Elder Rodgers." I haven't seen, and it'd been 20 years or so, maybe 30 years, I guess. And so we had a good chat with her, and then we saw her out and about again. And she says, "Hey, you got to go to the biosphere there. That's in my mom's honor." And so it was really neat to connect some dots there from so long ago.
Yeah.
And so I made some good friends there, made a lot of good missionary buddies, and have so many fond memories of being on a mission and serving the people there in California, and just a wonderful time. And then I came home, and I had a desire to tell our stories, our traditional stories. And so I started working at a museum, and they had a little volunteer telling the Catawba Indian story, but she was running around going, "Woo, woo, 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 woo," and I, whoa,
man.
stereotypical. And so we talked about that, and the education director said, "Well, here's a 45-minute time slot. I want you to take and put together a little curriculum, and let's do some pilot programs with the school across the road."
Yeah.
So next thing I know, I went from seeing a couple hundred kids to about 1,000 kids, and then 5,000 kids. And then so the director of the cultural center, she called and she says, "Hey, we need to bring that to the reservation." I'm like, "Okay." And so I went to work for the cultural center on the reservation and worked there for 10 years. I love to tell stories, but I also feel the spirit of things because they help to teach something, help to teach a lesson. And along that sweet little path I was on, I ran into this, at the time, non-Indian little white girl. And I ran into her, and we have a real neat story that we tell about how we met and dated for a couple of weeks. I found out she was the one. I asked her to marry me, and 3 months later we got sealed in the Washington, D.C. temple. And so it was kind of quick, but here we are. We'll celebrate our 30th this year. Nice. And so 30 years. We have 3 children together. Ben's our oldest. Isaac is our middle son, and Emily's our daughter, our youngest. And now we have 5 grandchildren. Aww. And 2 beautiful daughter-in-laws and a handsome son-in-law. And so life has come around a great deal, but in that, I remember going to the temple with our boys, and what a blessing it was. I didn't do my dad's work for a long time. Didn't know what to do. I guess I knew what to do. I just didn't get it done. But when my oldest son, Ben, went on his mission, we did my mom's work, and what a special experience that was. Christy, my wife here, she was in proxy there for my mother. And then we waited till Isaac left to go on his mission, and he stood in proxy for my dad, and Christy again for my mom, so I could be sealed to them. And knowing that our ancestors listened to the gospel on the reservation and were taught those things, that we can be sealed together forever. It let us know that at that time that our testimonies grew. And we were happy. I had a little brother who was just born a few hours and passed away. I was sealed to him that same day. And our eternal family got bigger. And what wonderful experiences that are. I'm grateful that the Lord put us in certain places, put certain people around us.
Yeah.
Travis's dad was my bishop for our youth. He had a time with all of us youth whenever we were 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And I learned a lot of good things from a lot of good people and a lot of traditional people who had been there from the get-go. Their ancestors were there from the beginning, including mine. So, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a whole lot of stories.
No, this is wonderful. So, as you lived there, did you have opportunities to serve in your ward? Was it a ward or a branch?
It was a ward, and I think it became. I want to say it was a. I'm trying to think because I know. I think it was. Oh, it was Gordon B. Hinckley that came through. Had to be in the mid to late 60s. No, about 65, I think it was, and set apart he was a branch president at the time, Donald Williams, and that's where I got my name from. Was from our branch president.
Yeah,
my mom named me after him and after my uncle, and everybody had already had my dad's name and his middle name. So, but I think it was shortly after that it became a ward, and I served there. I served in the young men's presidency right after I came home from a mission. I was in the elders quorum presidency. And then I got a call from the stake president, and he says, hey, we want you to... Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back. I got a phone call from the Sunday school president and the bishop. They said, we want you to be our gospel doctrine teacher. And I said, okay. I said, I know a little bit. I can teach what I can, because I'm definitely not a scriptorian or anything. Not like Johnny Beck. John Beck. He is the man. A lot of people, I would always look up to him when he would come to the reservation because he didn't come back a whole lot.
Yeah.
He came out to BYU and started his career with church education system.
And stayed. Away, yeah.
And I remember, he'll probably remember this if he listens to this, but he came home and we had a dear friend. His name was Emery Thomas. He owned this little blue Chevrolet pickup truck, and we worked on the church farm a lot. And his wife, Gwen, and my mom and we all went to the church farm and picked green beans together. I'll never forget that. A fun time. But I got this phone call to teach gospel doctrine. And I thought it was all right. It was a wonderful time to learn because I think we're put in positions in the church to learn.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not just because you are an expert. And so we were learning a lot. And about 3 months into it, I get a phone call. I was sick. I had stayed home sick. I wasn't feeling well. And dear brother in the stake prison, his name was Carl Smith. He came to my house, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, what's going on?" And so he came to my house, and we're sitting there on the couch. I wasn't feeling really well at all, and so I have a blanket on me, laying on the couch, and sit up. And he comes in the house, and he just extended a call to serve on the High Council. And I was like, "What?" I said, everybody says sometimes that the Lord has a sense of humor. And I thought he had a sense of humor, but he was real serious. And so I served on the High Councils for several years there and learned a lot, made a lot of... being on the High Council, you create this brotherhood with these brethren that you serve with.
Yeah.
And it's a real neat experience. So it allows you to teach the doctrine and travel to the different wards. And at the time, the South Stake was pretty good size. We would have to travel sometimes an hour to a different ward or so to speak at the ward there. And so I really love that. I like to talk, as you can tell. I love to talk. I love to talk about the scriptures, and I love to talk about the history of the church, and of course, I love to talk about our people in the history of the church. And so I did that for several years, and then I'm trying to think what we did after that. We moved into the to the Rock Hill ward, and I served as a ward mission leader several times. So we had a lot of love for the missionaries, had them in our house a lot. We actually were at church a little bit late today because we met one of the missionaries, the elder Cameron Harris, and we met his aunt and his sister at church today. And we were talking about how we used to spend a lot of time in our home and things like that. He's been home for some years, but just being around the missionaries helps us to remind us of what missionaries went through when they first came to the reservation, and those things. And then we moved to the ward boundary changed, and we were put into the York ward, and I served in the young men's presidency and an advisor to the priests, and then I was called as the high priest group leader and served there right before we moved here. Got here to Utah, and the Lord had another, some more sense of humor for me. And we lived in South Salt Lake and had one of the greatest bishops, I think, that we've ever had. Bishop Lato Lagatau. He's from Samoa, as they say it, right? And just love him to death. And we were there for about 2 weeks. And I've always been traditionally going to church with a suit on, like everybody else should, I guess, or whatever. And he comes up, he says, "You look like somebody that needs to be our young men's president." And I was like, "What?" He says, "Yes, you and Sister Rodgers come meet me in the office." And there he calls me to the young men's president and dealt with those fine young men. And within 2 weeks, we were in Goblin Valley on a trip that they had already planned and had a good time doing that and loved those young men and working in the ward there. And then we moved to Saratoga Springs, Utah here, and got called to be the gospel doctrine teacher again. And Chrissy said, "You know what that means?" I'm like, "No, honey. This is Utah. They got plenty of Mormon people out here to take all these Mormons."
Lightning doesn't strike twice.
Right. Lightning doesn't strike twice. We'll be all right. Well, it struck twice, and I got called to be on the High Council again. And I served there for a couple of years with President Tillman and some good people in our neighborhood. And then Christy and I were shopping down in in Orem at the University Place Mall, and a young native lady walked past, and she had a couple of little ones with her and her husband, dark-skinned fella and long hair. And I said, anytime I see a native person, I always ask them what tribe they're with. And I asked her, and I said, "Excuse me, what tribe are you with?" And she says, "Well, I'm Navajo." And she took a second, and she goes, "But I know you." And I said, "You do?" And she said, "Catawba? Chief Rodgers?" And I was like, "Yeah." And this is some 10 or so years later. And there's a group called ROC, which stands for Remember Our Culture. And they travel around the country and do different performances, native performances, and Hawaiian performances, Polynesian performances, Hispanic dances, and others. And they had come to our reservation during my tenure as chief. And their director, matter of fact, gave me a little hoodie with the big design on the back for rock. And I still have that hoodie. I still wear it every now and then. And so it's kind of funny. We met them there, and she goes, "Hey, do you know there's a Native American ward that meets down here in Provo?" And I was like, "No." She goes, "Well, why don't you come?" And I'm like, "Okay." I don't look like you're particularly, you're average Native American. And so then where I worked at, I had another customer that would come in, and he would, "Hey, why don't you come and go to church with us?" Because he went down there too. He was Navajo. He was Yazi. Uh-huh. And Yazi's a pretty common name. And so we went, and that's where we moved our records to. And it was kind of funny. We were sitting there, and Christy and I were just wondering what we were going to do. And next thing you know, struck 3 times.
No.
I got called to High Council again and served there during the COVID time until this last year. And it was kind of crazy. And actually, I got called I was the counselor in the Elders Quorum presidency, and then I got called to the High Council, so it was kind of funny. So my church tenure has been fun. Learned a lot. Had this beautiful young lady here to take my hand and guide me along the way and help me, and she's just wonderful. We had a neat story when we got married, and and just have had a wonderful life. We'll celebrate our 30th anniversary this year, and our wonderful kids, and the church has been good to us. It has helped us realize how important it is for us to be a family.
Yeah.
And we try to do the Sunday dinner thing most of the time. It works. Sometimes it just doesn't. But it's important for us to see our families and how they grow. And as we get older, and as children are children, we poke and prod and try to keep them on the right path. And hopefully they listen and do what's right.
Yeah. So going back in time a little bit, you've mentioned that you were chief of your tribe for a little while.
Yes, ma'am.
How did that come about? How did you put yourself in that position? And while you were in that position, were you able to share the gospel with your people?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. The Chief Gilbert Blue at the time had announced that he was going to resign. And some of the older ladies said, "Hey, Gilbert's resigning. We want to see if you want to be chief. Would you?" I literally got several phone calls from these older ladies. And it was kind of funny because my mom was involved with that too. And so I said, well, y'all get me enough votes up, we'll do this, because this is an election thing.
Yeah.
We have to literally walk the dirt road and knock the doors, and like being a missionary all over again.
Yeah.
And so we, I said, well, y'all get the phone ringing and let me see how it does. And for about 3 days, my phone didn't stop ringing, did it? And people were calling, and they were finding out I was going to run for chief, and I got a lot of good support. And so
how old were you about?
Oh, that was in 2007. I'm 54 now, so
in your 40s.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I don't think you can learn to be chief. That's not a learned thing. It's something you have to dive into and just deal with it. And so it was a neat experience. I won the election about 6:30 on Sunday morning is when the election committee came out of the longhouse and certified it and announced that I was the winner. And I had to take a deep breath because I didn't really know what I was getting into.
You're like, okay then.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy, and it was a good thing. I was able to talk a lot to different people that I came in contact with. I won't mention any names because just to save them from any ridicule, if it would be, or any questions of why did you listen to him or whatever. But quite a few people I'd run into would talk about the church because the church is so prominent on the reservation. I mean, there's church right there on the reservation. Yeah. And so we'd talk about a lot and share the gospel as many times as I could. And I worked with, you interviewed Mr. Keel, Franklin Keel, who used to be the Eastern Regional Director for the BIA there in Nashville. I worked for him for a little while, for about a year. And so it was good. I mean, what was good about him, and I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, is I would be in D.C., he'd be in D.C., and I'd say, hey, Mr. Keel, you got time for us to talk? He says, yeah, but can we arrange it around the time that I'm going to the temple? And so it was good to see that and hear that, and just, good to see those things. But anytime I'd come in contact with people, I wasn't afraid to say what would need to be said. And I work now in a different situation, and I work with about, how many girls is it? About 12 young ladies, and I'm their manager. And it's kind of funny, as I came on board, I'm just sharing this because I think the Lord wants us to share His light. And so as I began my job there, I started doing one-on-ones with everybody and seeing how they were and what needed to happen, and some things I need to know about them to help them be a better employee. Yeah. And so I always tell stupid dad jokes and different little things, but my wife can attest to what I'm getting ready to say because it was said the other night at a friend of ours' graduation party. She walked up and told Christy, she said, Christy, I just love having him at work because he is just a light, a ray of light that everybody just comes to. Mm-hmm. And as I did my one-on-ones with everybody, I said, hey, what do y'all think about me? You got to ask, right? How do you feel about me? And it was those words where you're a ray of light to us. You're just so fun. You're happy. You don't you have to be stern on certain things, but you are lovingly stern with us.
Yeah.
And so it's what the Lord has given me to share. And it's the light He's asked us to share with everybody. And it's what I've been able to do. And I've done it with, I have an old friend back home. I won't mention his name, but he's Methodist. And he and I met a long time ago on a situation where we were doing some counseling with one another. I used to do financial education. And anyway, so our kids met when they were cheering on the cheerleading squad. Emily, my daughter, and his daughter. And so we became somewhat associated with one another. But when I started this new job, he and I became really close friends. And so he would call me, every now and then, and he'd say, "Hey, Donald." And I'm like, "Yeah, what's up?" He says, "I need a dose of Mormonism. Can we go grab lunch?" And so we would go grab lunch, and we'd talk about the church and different things, and it was just good. I mean, even now, if I would walk into his office, he would jump up, give me a big old bear hug, and say, "Love you, brother." I mean, that's the way he is, and that's the way we are. And I think that's our responsibility as members of the church and as leaders in the community, is that you share that light. You share that opportunity for people to know that you're a good person. And in politics, you can be a good person, and somebody might think you're not the best person in the world, but that's just the way it goes with politics. But beyond that, as I look back on my tenure as chief, I think I did the best job I could with what we had, and was able to do a lot for the people. And there would be times that one of our elders would call and they say, "Hey, I can't get my toilet to stop running." And I remember driving almost an hour and a half to get to this one lady's house. And I took a couple of guys with me, and I said, "Hey, let's go see what we can do for her." And it was a good experience to be able to help them. But I think that the greatest thing that I've gained throughout my life is a testimony that the Lord loves us. He loves us all, regardless of where we come from, regardless of the indifferences that we have. He loves us all, and we have to portray that to everyone that we come in contact with.
Yeah. Do you have any miracles or tender mercies that are not too sacred to share that you would like to share right now?
I have a couple. When I was about 27 or 28, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. My right eye fell, and I could look at my feet, and my left eye was looking straight. And so I went to the doctor, and he says, "Well, there's only one or two things that can be going on here. You either have myasthenia, which is a disease in the muscle of the eye, which causes it to relax, or you have MS." I mean, it's right off the bat. I was like, "What is this stuff?" And I didn't know what it was. And so Christy and I started doing a little research, and I had to go home. He immediately put me on some medications that required me to be at home for a few days. And the nurse that come in, Christy was at work, and the nurse comes in, and she goes, "Oh, you might as well, this is awful. You need to get ramps, you need to get wheelchairs, you need to get all this, because that's where you're going to end up."
Oh, my word.
And I was like, holy cow. And so me and Christy talked about it, and we had different exacerbations. I mean, I had to use a cane for about a year to walk with because I had some issues with my legs and mobility and things. And so I had 5 lesions on my brain, which are the short circuits. That's what causes multiple sclerosis. And so I had an exacerbation. I went to the doctor, and that Sunday before I went to the doctor on Monday, Chrissy's dad gave me a blessing. And he promised me that I would be healed from all these infirmities that I had at the time. So I went to the doctor the next day, and he says, "Well, let's go have an MRI done," because I had an exacerbation on that Friday, and he called and made an appointment for Monday, and I got the blessing on that Sunday before that. And so I went, and Rocky Hill had an MRI done. He calls me, he says, "Them stupid people, they sent me the wrong one." And I'm like, okay. He says, "Go get another one." And I said, okay. He was an MS specialist out of Charlotte, world-renowned MS doctor, Dr. Kaufman, Michael Kaufman. And he said, dang it, Donald, they sent me the wrong one again. It's not yours. I know it's not yours. And he said, just come up here to Charlotte and do it up here. And so Wednesday I went up to Charlotte and had another MRI done. And he called me on Thursday. He said, bring your wife up here Friday. We got to talk about this.
Oh.
So he hangs up the first one that I did with him that had the 5 lesions on the brain. And he says, this is the one from Piedmont down there, and this is the other one from Piedmont down there, and here's the one from Charlotte. No more lesions. And he said, son, I don't know if you believe in miracles, because I was on interferon therapy. Christy had to give me a shot in my rear end every other day. And it was pretty tough. I had this bleak outlook on life when we built our house on the reservation. We put a ramp on the side. We had all the doors set for a wheelchair and everything. And so he says, I don't know if you believe in miracles, young man. He says, but this is it. This looks like a miracle to me. And he says, I want you to stop the interferon. And interferon, it gives you other side effects. So you have to take all these other medications for side effects. It's like having cancer. Oh. And so we got off all the medication, and thanks to the faith that my wife has in me, and the prayers and the priesthood blessings and the blessings that have been given to me. And of course, I had to have a little faith too. But if I could tell you, the best nurse in the world is this woman that's sitting back here. She's taken care of me every moment of my life. And as we went through that, and was able to have a miracle, and that was one thing. And so that was one of the greatest miracles that we had because of a priesthood blessing we know that was given to me by my father-in-law. And I think that, and we say miracles, but this was a tough one for my daughter. She was pregnant and she got sick, and she went to the doctor and he says, "Oh, you're having a miscarriage. Just go home." You know, they didn't do a traditional, as they say, a DNC on her or whatever. So she went home. And she goes to the bathroom, and she has this little baby in the toilet. And she named him Baxton. And Christy here went up there to help her take care of him. Why would you flush him down the toilet?
No.
He had a body.
Yeah.
And she went up there to help her take care of him, and then our son-in-law and her little family went up to the mountains up in Park City and buried him up there. Now, I say what a miracle that is, because we hear all in this world today, oh, you can have an abortion with a heartbeat, and all this other mess, all these politics that deal with the life. And when you see that little life that had started, that had abruptly ended, he was a little miracle in his own sense. All he had to do was come and get his little body according to what we believe, and he's done. Mm-hmm. No test. He's going to be okay. And so as I've given all of our kids and our grandkids native names, I told him after thinking about it and praying about it, we named him Lightfoot because he stepped lightly on our hearts. And what a great little fella. We feel him near sometimes. And I think those are miracles. And the other miracles are when we realize what we've been given. Why in the world would we not want to share it? The gospel of Jesus Christ helps us to realize those things and helps us to know that our families are forever and that healings happen and that miracles happen. And in the world that we live in this world that we live in today, so many people don't want to recognize those as miracles.
Yeah.
They do different things. But I just know that if it wasn't for, as we've gone through life, as Christy and I have gone through life together for now almost 30 years, it's important that we know who we depend on, how we depend upon them, and what we do. The unfortunate thing for me is over the last couple of years, I've developed a few other health issues with some blockages in my neck that are almost closed, and we haven't done anything about that yet. We're just trying drugs, and I'm diabetic, so I have diabetic feet, and I've broken my foot several times, and just recently coming out of staph infections in both my feet. And so it's been pretty hard. And poor Christy, she said the other day, she says, honey, I know whenever we say that before we get here, we told the Lord what kind of, how did you say that? What kind of trials we have. She says, why did you sign up for all these trials? But she's there with me every step of the way. And in this world we live in, we have to have that help and support. And like I said, she's the best nurse in the world. Taking care and tending to my feet every night. And just with circulation issues, I wear those big pressurized boots from my feet to my thighs that she helps me with every night. And just, in this world that we live in, to have a companion like that to just make my life a whole lot easier and whatnot. So
she's your miracle too.
She is. She's definitely my miracle. Love that is without end for her, and that she has for me. Because we know the gospel. We know that we'll be there together forever. And I think that she's got it down pat about this serving thing, serving one another, and she definitely has that down pat. And to know that as we go through, we're getting ready to go through another trial here in a little bit. We're finishing a house next month, and we got to move.
Oh, yeah.
So that's going to be the trial. But she just makes our home a happy home. And our grandkids, when they come over, they're like, I don't want to go home. I want to stay with Papa and Gigi. And that's what they call us. And to hear them sing their primary songs to us, and to have our littlest one that's in our basement right now, little Hudson, when he says our prayers for over our food, and to hear them say those things. And I've got another little one that's back in South Carolina. My son moved back to my middle son, Isaac. He's a police officer there in Camden, South Carolina. And so he has a little one there. And her first word I taught her when she was here, I taught her to say hey. And she literally said hey. And then when we were there at Christmas time, and I have to tell you about that real quick too. When we were there at Christmas time, I taught her how to say Papa. So she'll FaceTime me and say Papa. Now, let me tell you what Christy wrote me into doing 3 years ago. 3 years ago, she said, honey, I think you'd make a good Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Have you seen my pictures on Facebook
yet?
So I grow my beard out starting in September, and it's white. Yeah. It's whiter as my hair. And so she started doing this thing at Santa Claus, but it became a very spiritual thing. The first church, this is before COVID hit real bad, actually the year before COVID hit, we went to do a church breakfast, and all these little kids come running to me and hugging me and telling me they love me, right? So I got home, and we had been reading something at church the next day, and I said, honey, you know what this reminds me of? She goes, what? I said, I feel just an inkling of what Christ must have felt like when he called all the children to him and how they came to him. I feel that. Oh, miracle. And this past year we were up here at, where's that place, Christy? Up at Cedar Hills. And we were at the country club up there, Santa Claus, and Christy's dressed as Mrs. Santa, and we were talking to all these kids. They had a little event, and so they would make a little thing and come to us and take a few pictures and leave. And this little fella comes up. He's 5 years old, and his little hands were kind of crumpled up and very articulated. And he's in his little electric wheelchair, and he's like, oh. And his mother said, I think he wants to sit on your lap. And I said, okay, because I couldn't understand him.
Yeah.
I think he wants to sit on your lap and let me take a picture. I said, okay. So we got him out of the wheelchair, and he's sitting right here on my left side, and he's got his little crumpled up arms and hands up on my shoulder just like this. And Christy's sitting right here beside me, and his mother was standing right here in front of me taking a picture. He wrapped his arm around me, and he very simply said, Santa, I love you so much. And his mother, the tears started coming out of her eyes. We both are sitting there, Christy and myself, tears coming out of our eyes. And he gently took his little hands down and communicated to his mom, And she said, he has never spoken. And when he spoke those words, she said, that was a miracle for us.
Yeah.
Now, what does Santa Claus have to do about all this? The miracle of St. Nick and how he was taught by his family about Christ. And what he needed to do with his life was to teach goodness, ask people to be good, ask them to be happy, spread cheer and joy, and give a little gift of something to someone. So he was taught by the right person, Christ himself. I think he understood what Christ wanted him to do with his life. And so Christy and I share the true meaning of Christmas with everybody along the way. So here's this old Catawba chief now is wearing a red hat as Santa Claus. But it's been a good turn in our world because we see the miracles. We see what the kids are like and adults. The first year we did this, my beard was really tight. Uh-huh. And this little old lady, she was probably in her 80s or maybe even early 90s. She was probably 5 feet tall. She comes up and pats my cheeks, and she starts to cry. Now, I'm telling you, all this has all been spiritual the whole time. And maybe it's through my eyes. Maybe that's because the eyes I choose to look with. It's not the worldly eyes. And she patted me on the cheek, and she goes, oh, you remind me of my Santa. And I was like, really? What Santa was that? She goes, the one from Miracle on 34th Street. That's who you look like. And she just patted my face and just cried and hugged me and just wouldn't let go. And so this whole time is life has come full circle for me. I feel as though I'm doing what the Lord wants me to do, is to help kids feel the true meaning of the Christmas, because we tell the true story with the families we visit and anywhere we go. And as this transition has happened, I felt like Tim Allen.
Yeah.
We were in the mall, and I'm sitting there with my boots and bells on, jeans, an ugly sweater, and an ugly sequin Santa hat. And this little kid walks up to me and says, hey, can I tell you what I want for Christmas? I'm like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And so he sits on my lap, and then next thing I know, here's 3 or 4 or 5 little kids done lined up and doing the same thing. And one last miracle story. We were at Luminaria up here at Thanksgiving Point.
Yeah.
And at the end of the walk, there's 2 deer, Blitzen and Dancer. Blitzen and Dancer. At the front, they have the hay bales where the kids stand up on, and they wave at the deer. Come here, and they have 2 animal handlers. Don't touch the deer. And so my granddaughter comes up, little Bella, and she says, Papa, can you get the deer to come to us? And so I walk around to the side, and here is the animal handler, Christy, my granddaughter, and me. And so I allowed to be, ho, 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 ho. Come here, Dancer. Let's go over here and come see me, and let's talk about this long night we're going to have this month. That deer walked over to me, put his head in my hand, and just rubbed his head all over my hand.
Way.
And my granddaughter's like, see, Papa, you are the real Santa Claus. And all the kids across the way standing on those hay bales, it was like BYU had made a touchdown. Raw, it is Santa, woo! And I told Christy, I said, honey, I feel so much like Tim Allen this year again because all these things happen. But as we have been visiting with these people in their homes and doing different things, they have realized that we bring the Spirit with us.
Yeah.
Because that's what our job is to do. And it's a simple little thing such as portraying Santa, but we do it in a way that lets him know that he was a believer in Christ. And that's why he does what he does. And so it teaches him a different manner of what Christmas is about. And so that's where my life's ended up so far. It's been a wonderful life. And the Lord has truly blessed us with all the things he has, with so many different things. And I just know that he lives, and he loves us all, regardless. If we make a mistake and we sin, he loves us enough to allow us to repent and be better. And were it not for him, the Catawba people wouldn't be where they are. We wouldn't be here. I would highly doubt I would be in Utah, but our kids came to go to school here, and we have a wonderful life here. But I know that it's because our Heavenly Father loved us so much that he sent him to do what he did for us all. And our testimonies grow each time, every Sunday at church, as we just visit with different people from in our Native American ward. We have so many tribes that are represented: Cheyenne, We have, of course, some Navajo and some Cherokee and Lumbee. Lumbees from North Carolina. We have a handful of Lumbees there. And have so many. And to learn from them and to see their testimonies grow, how they came into the church too.
Yeah.
Helps all of ours to grow. And you've had some of those on your podcast before.
Yeah. So I have one final question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
What does it mean to you to know that you belong to the tribe of Israel?
Well, I think that as we go through what the tribe of Israel has been through and what the promises are made to the whole tribe and some individually, is that we realize those blessings. That we take those blessings and utilize them in as we say in the church, in our everyday life, and we are blessed to be here. And I jokingly tell this about this one thing. The scripture goes what about blossoming like a rose? What's the preface to that? There was maybe a miscomment or something about the native people would turn white and delights them and blossom like a rose in the desert, right?
Yeah.
Well, I've done that. I used to be extremely dark, or darker, and I come to Utah and now I'm white. So I guess I did what the Lord wanted me to do. But I'm sorry, I led off that with the joke. But it's important for us all to know our part, because there's different parts that the tribes have.
Yeah.
And our part is to be likened to Christ and to share that knowledge with all those that we come in contact with, and let them know that regardless of where we came from, we talked about this in Elders Quorum today, about the plan that our Heavenly Father has for us, and that what part of the plan are we, and how do we participate in that plan. And I know a lot of people, and the church calls it the plan of happiness. That's the end goal. There's a lot of trials that go on in this and things of this nature, and through being a part of the house of Israel, we know that we're promised those eternal things, provided we do what's right, and provided we repent of our wrongdoings and move forward. And I think that as we understand that, and understand that as a whole tribe of Israel, that we understand that we're all brothers and sisters, and that we need to help one another. I know we talked about earlier about helping one another carry one another's burdens to make them light, because some people are stronger in certain burdens and others are weaker. And so those who are stronger, we need to help. In today's society, we struggle with the understanding of mental health issues and how people deal with those and how they don't deal with those. Everybody deals with them in some way. Some just don't have them. And as we go through life, there are people that are around us, even within our own families, who have those issues that we have to address and have to help carry those burdens with. And so being a part of the house of Israel and the tribe of Israel lets us know that we're all together, regardless of what tribe we come from, that our end goal is the same.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
So since this episode is longer than usual, I'm not really going to give much of a thought today, other than I just want you to know that He knows you. He knows me. He knows you. He knows what you're going through. He loves you. Our Savior loves you. And tonight at Family Home Evening, we were telling the kids, we were talking about the Sabbath day and how it brings us closer to Him, but it's up to us to make the Sabbath day holy. So we have to come closer to Him so that He can come closer to us. And that's the atonement. So I hope you have a super wonderful, awesome day. Tribe of Testimonies is not affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The music is a traditional hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, arranged and performed by Kyle Forsyth. If you know someone who might be interested in being a guest, please reach out to me at tribeoftestimonies@gmail.com.